Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is kushalmehra. All right, so Mark Carney has been on quite a tour. So he first went to China. From China, he went to Qatar. And from Qatar, he was at Davos, where he has now given a speech that has been very much in discussion throughout the global world, including India. Quite a lot of Indian media folks also picked up on Mark Carney's speech, which was very interesting because usually when the World Economic Forum happens, the Indian media's coverage is usually which particular chief minister, as in the premier of an Indian state, goes, what kind of deals are signed. But it was very interesting. Out of all the global leaders, only Mark Carney's speech was picked up by the Indian media. And they actually had a dedicated discussion around it. Obviously, post that, Donald Trump has come and spoken at Davos, and and Donald Trump has responded to Mark Carney in one line. But we'll first talk about Carney's trip to China and Qatar, and with a special focus on China. And to talk about it, I have with me Darshan, Maharaja, and Kirk Lubimov. Guys, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's start with this. Kirk, I'll ask you the question first. So Carney has agreed to a deal with China. Essentially, what I have understood, and correct me if I'm wrong in any place, Kirk, but the summary of this is the Canadian canola farmer was really struggling. I clearly remember last year talking to a few farmers in and around Ontario. I just bumped into them at a Tim Hortons, believe it or not, and they were just grabbing a coffee, and they just overheard me talking about the state of affairs, and they told me how much they were struggling. And I think Carney basically had to cut a deal about the canola and a couple of other things. And the bargain the Chinese demanded was at least 49,000 EVs are now going to be sold. Chinese EVs are going to be sold in Canada. And Doug Ford is now really angry at Mark Carney, who used to be his bestie. What have I missed?
No, it's pretty much correct, right? It's the first visit by a Canadian Prime Minister, I think, in 10 years, if not longer, into China. So it's really a brand new relationship that's being built. Last year, Canada put tariffs on China, on Chinese steel. So the Canadian and US policy on certain things, such as Chinese goods and Chinese steel, is pretty much the same. And we put the tariffs on China, and China, of course, decided to attack Canada first because they essentially could. But yeah, they target our farmers, our Saskatchewan particular industries, and it was really painful because that's where majority of the production goes to. Of course, the issue is we're now opening our country to dealing with Chinese rather than dealing with Chinese issues. And by that I mean is we have secret police stations there here in Canada. Remember, we had a Canadian citizen that was executed in Canada. We had two Michaels that were imprisoned in China. We have intimidation of Canadian citizens and politicians every single election. We knowingly, we have Canadian politicians that have CCP influence in our in our politics, in our elections, and we have done nothing about it. And now we are in a position where it's really hard to call any of that off because we're essentially dependent on those trade deals.
Now, Darshan, here's the interesting bit about this entire kerfuffle is that every time Carney announces something that he or she is going to do with India, there is a whole litany of op-eds written in the Globe. CBC suddenly, manages to call the Indian High Commissioner, where every question is about, the problems between India and Canada and Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And every time Prime Minister Carney goes there, I barely see that level of question and answer about the things Kirk has mentioned. Or am I missing something? The level of scrutiny when it comes to China in the Canadian media is not as much as the level of scrutiny it is there with India. I'm not saying there should be no scrutiny of India. Before somebody misunderstands me, it's Canada's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Canada has every right to talk about these things. I think any country should. But the point being that why don't they do it with China?
I think our main problem here in Canada is that we are not transactional, which would be good, but knee jerk. So we have knee jerk reaction when it comes to India, where the only thing that the media wants to discuss is all the problems that have existed for the last couple of years plus. And when it comes to China, I did see a CBC reporter asking some kind of a question about along the same lines, human rights and the problems that we have with China. But as you said, it doesn't go to that extent or in that depth. So when it comes to China, our practical objectives dominate. Whereas, as Kirk said, and we have discussed this before, the whole issue of foreign interference started with CCP, not with India. Then the whole India thing came in, and then CCP issue has disappeared. So, see, on one level, we have to be practical. We have to see where there is trade, and we have to pursue that trade. At the other level, there are certain standards that we want to be associated with, and then there is always that balancing act of which way you go or how do you balance the two. And in that sense, I think we are not doing a good job of it, because once again, with Qatar, for example, uh, there is a whole issue of human rights, which I don't think anybody has asked anybody in government, about the human rights issues of Qatar. But when it comes to India, it's always about human rights. So we don't we haven't quite figured out as to what kind of a country we want to be. And that's where, like, if we are going to be completely hard-nosed business minded people, then so be it. Then let's not talk about all the lofty principles. Or if we want to stick to principles, then let's accept the fact that trade will suffer on that account. But we don't want to do either. We want to do both. So that's where the problem is, a question of identity. We haven't been able to figure that out.
Yet, actually, that's a very good point that you've made, and that's something any country and every country is going to struggle with in beyond a point. I don't know what you two think about it, because I clearly remember this bit being asked to Prime Minister Carney, and he said, "Well, now we have a two-pronged strategy where, on one end, we have those hard discussions with all these countries about, Canada's issue with foreign interference, and at the same time we have trade with them." Essentially, isn't that what every country does, Kirk? Like, it is what it is. Like, we live in a world where every country has these blind spots. It's not like India doesn't have those blind spots, or the United States of America. It's like, I find it so funny that the Americans are like, how dare you go and buy Chinese EVs? America is a far bigger importer of Chinese goods, not in absolute numbers. Obviously, their economy is bigger, but even in percentile terms, like percentage of their imports, they import far more material from China than Canada does in that sense. And then America comes and kind of gives Canada these lectures, and the best part is American YouTubers going all crazy. Oh, why is Canada cozying up to China and all of that? Like, in what position are the Americans coming from? That's what I'm not able to understand. Every country does it.
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma, right? I think there's a little differentiation here. So I guess let's step back a little bit. We got to remember when Mark Carney ran for election, in his campaign during the question period, he actually brought it up, and he said that China is one of our biggest threats. So he campaigned on that China is not a friend. Now there's a bit of a difference in how we do business, right? The US is a bigger import of stuff from China, absolutely, but they import a whole bunch of junk. Toothpaste, toothbrushes, toys, you name it, some TVs and all that stuff. But the problem is, we decided to go into bed with them with critical and fundamental businesses for us and for Canada, which is the auto industry, which is bringing supply chain to make EVs into Canada. And this is a direct threat to their economy and to our economy. Let's remember, the Liberals have bet over $52 billion in potential subsidies on creating an EV industry in Canada. And they did so with Doug Ford's blessing and words that it'll be a closed loop supply chain. In other words, we'll be mining the rare earths, we'll be foaming, we're creating the batteries in Canada, and we're putting them into the cars and exporting them. None of that happened, right? Most battery plants have gone away. We're still negotiating on a road into to most our best rare earth deposits. We finally came to agreement on that after 20 years, and now hopefully some mines will get created. So the issue is that we are getting exposed with this trade to the most critical aspect of what we tried to do ourselves and failed, and what the US has been hammering us on, that they don't need our cars. So instead of cooperating and developing that side of the auto industry internally here, we brought in China to do so, which is probably one of the dumbest mistakes we could have done in this business case in particular. And as we all know, the Chinese cars are banned in many, many places, especially in many, many military places, because they spy on everyone. So it's China for decades has been thinking about, how do we infiltrate North America? And then comes Mark Carney and says, come on in.
So, okay, I understand the bit from a security perspective, but isn't there a cap on the number of vehicles that can enter, and he's negotiated what he has, because the situation here is that if the Americans are not going to buy cars from Canada, then where does Canada go? Where does it leave Canada then?
Well, Canada doesn't make its own cars, right? We don't have a car brand. We make cars for the US, right? So we should be grateful that they even have factories here. And our factories are very unproductive, which is why we've been losing some of them to Mexico. Canada's auto industry has been losing employment for 20 years. It's essentially been surviving off different cash injections, different support from the government. This $52 billion was just another twist on it. The government did say there'll be 49,000 Chinese EVs. It'll be built up, I think, to 75,000 over 5 years. But they said they're expecting China to make a substantial investment into auto industry in Canada within 3 years.
So Darshan, where does Canada go from here? Let's say, he also visited Qatar, which was very interesting. So he basically made a visit to two countries that would have pissed Donald Trump off. Actually, Qatar would not have pissed Donald Trump off. They gifted him a plane, so he would not mind that.
Yeah, I was talking to someone who has worked in a Canadian who was posted in the Canadian embassy at Beijing, and apparently at that time there were already issues. This was way back, I think in the early 2000s, and even at that time there were problems of the CCP spying on Canadian diplomats, including via microwave ovens. And if you remember, I think 3 or 4 years ago, there was a whole controversy because the security equipment at Canadian embassies the world over, the contract was given to a Chinese company. And at that time, there was a brouhaha that, you are inviting them to spy on you and on the other countries because there are interactions taking place at the embassies. So, there, as Kirk said, their long-term strategic objective is to infiltrate North America and Europe. And these, 49,000 cars, they are being painted as, just 3% of the overall car market in Canada, etc., etc. But that is not the right metric to look at it, because they just need a few strategically placed cars. Who is going to buy them? EV market is not that big in Canada. So if the government decides that in order to honor their commitment, they want to buy them, then there is even greater risk, because now these would be placed in strategic locations, at strategic places. So it's a major concern for us as Canadians. But I don't think any deal that had to be struck. It's okay with me if you try to increase trade and try to balance your principles vis-a-vis your practical objectives. But yielding on EVs was a bad decision, according to me, because these are mobile espionage centers, as far as I am concerned. So that is a strategic blunder, as I see it.
Yeah,
Okay,
and it's
fair
one
enough.
that's
But
not. If I can just add to it, it's one that wasn't needed. We're selling more oil to China than ever. We're selling natural gas to China more than ever. There was just a tanker into Strait and in onto West Coast picking up gas to them. So we're already selling more of the most productive stuff we possibly could to China, right? That this EV stuff was not needed at all. It was probably China's way of pushing it, and we got to think about where is this 49,000 number came from. China, someone probably did strategic calculation. This is what we need, and this is what we got.
I understand that. But then what about the canola farmer, which is a major part of Canadian existence, right? So
Mhm.
how would have Carney managed the problem of the canola farmer? What if the Chinese must have said that we'll buy your canola, because they already have bought one giant shipment already. It's like literally Carney lands, and I think it was 60,000 tons or something. That's what I
Mhm.
read in the news. And there we go. There's a solution. But here's the problem. Again, the canola farmer is completely dependent on China. So which takes me back to Carney's own speech. Let's now pivot to Carney's speech, where Carney said a lot of things, but there are two particular bits in Carney's speech that really stood out for me. And the irony is, everything that Carney says here is applicable to China, but the irony is only lost to Carney, I guess. So let's play a couple of clips.
We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, that the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically. And we knew that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. This fiction was useful. And American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods, open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. So we placed the sign in the window. We participated in the rituals, and we largely avoided calling out the gaps between rhetoric and reality. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
Everything Mark Carney has said over here, I'm being the first one to admit it's actually a very good speech if you just leave it alone, just by itself as a speech. It's a wonderful speech. It's great delivery. I think Carney. I always thought Carney was a reluctant speaker, but hear him speak this time, I actually changed my mind. And the other bit in the speech, where he said. He actually kind of praised America in a way, and the bit here.
We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false.
So over here, he follows up and he says American hegemony basically kind of helped them. And my whole point over here is that everything Mark Carney has said is equally applicable to China. Why isn't it applicable to China? The bit where he talks about America gave us public goods, infrastructure. That bit, it's far ahead, so I just skipped it. But okay, you're just going from one hegemon to another, right? That's about it. What am I missing here?
No, you see, first of all, his admission that rules-based order was a farce is something that other countries have been saying for many, many years. Typically, they were at the receiving end of the farce, so their voice did not count. But now we are in the same boat. So suddenly the wisdom has dawned that this was a farce. Okay. But see, for any country in that kind of a position, choosing one or the other hegemon is the only option. There are no other options. You don't have your own strength. You don't have a viable military. You don't have viable industry. The only things that you used to be good at, namely natural resources, you have throttled that for a decade. So this is the only short-term options in fact, the only one that he has, which is to go over to China. But then there are practical realities, the 9,000 kilometer long border, the ease of trade with the US, which is why that trade has flourished. And the nature of CCP, which is vastly different from the nature of USA, warts and all, US is still a better trading partner than CCP. So I don't know where this is going to go, but he needs to be careful how he balances between US and China.
Now, Kirk, I want to play Trump's response. I think it's the most hilarious response ever. It's like, how can you not be entertained with a person like Donald Trump, even if you are at the receiving end? You can't stop laughing at the way the man speaks. Like, I laughed straight for 10 minutes. I was like, what a response.
We're building a golden dome that's going to, just by its very nature, going to be defending Canada. Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements. We're building a golden...
All right, Kirk. Your turn. Canada lives because of the United States. He just said it. He said it. He did not even flinch. I think he's the first. He was the first American president who just said the quiet part out loud. So
yeah, and he isn't wrong in general, unfortunately, right? He gave Mark Carney a public spanking, like to do that at an international gathering like that, and essentially told him, "Sit down, puppy, and before I take away your bone." And it's it was a pretty big thing to say in general in public. The thing is, this whole conference was, Mark Carney's speech was about globalism, but globalism that works for everyone, right? Mark Carney's whole platform and goal is to create carbon credit-based trade, right? The U.S. communication at the World Economic Forum was the globalization does not work, right? That's what the Secretary of Commerce Lutnick's speech was, which was excellent, absolutely excellent. Probably the best speech there. I think Mark Carney's speech was excellent. The problem is he just doesn't have the deliverables behind it. You can, do a dog and pony show and everything else that comes with it, but you have to be able to put action behind your words, and that's what Canada is missing. And Lutnick's speech, which was about 2 minutes long, I don't know if you want to play it. It's on my account, but it's his whole point was that globalization has put countries dependent on other countries that may not be allies, right? So you got to be dependent. You got to focus on your workers, which is absolutely right. It is the duty of every politician to do. That's what they're elected to do, is to represent the workers, their citizens. Now, what Mark Carney is talking about, the supply chain there, is ironic because for the last 40 years, China has been going around the world in small countries, big countries, and taking over resources, creating monopoly in rare earths, in different things that everyone is dependent on. This is what the US has realized in this AI and industrialization 4.0 race, is that to be able to build AI, to be able to build data center, to be able to build computation, you need two things. One is energy, and a lot of it. And two is you need to be able to actually build computation. So you need the rare earths. You need to be able to produce batteries and semiconductors at home. And you can be dependent on China or Taiwan, which China openly wants to take over, to do so. So that's a national threat. And countries still don't get it. You look at Europe, their electrical production has been dropping for decades in some places, especially in Germany and the UK, because they fell into the green agenda. They can't industrialize. They're decades behind now in infrastructure needs. Even a couple of years ago, Germany still brought down their nuclear plants for literally no reason at all, except for a couple good headlines that we're going green, even though it's the most green power source you can have. And now they're facing with the highest cost of energy too because of it, because they don't have dependable energy. So this is what the US has realized, and Canada still hasn't realized that. And our relationship with the US is just so powerful and intertwined. All of our roads essentially go down and face into the US, including pipelines, everything else. And this is what the speech in between Carney and Donald Trump still, they're still kind of butting heads like a couple of kids in a playground. The reality is we need to work more together against China's monopoly that they've been building for the last 40 years.
Fair enough. I'll play that speech of Lutnick that you're talking about. I think this is the one you're talking about.
We are in Davos at the World Economic Forum, and the Trump administration and myself, we are here to make a very clear point. Globalization has failed the West and the United States of America. It's a failed policy. It is what the WEF has stood for, which is export, offshore, far shore, find the cheapest labor in the world, and the world is a better place for it. The fact is, it has left America behind. It has left the American workers behind. And what we are here to say is that America First is a different model, one that we encourage other countries to consider, which is that our workers come first. We can have policies that impact our workers. Sovereignty is your borders. You're entitled to have borders. You shouldn't offshore your medicine. You shouldn't offshore your semiconductors. You shouldn't offshore your entire industrial base and have it be hollowed out beneath you. You should not be dependent for that which is fundamental to your sovereignty on any other nation. And if you're going to be dependent on someone, it darn well better be your best allies. Okay? And so that is a different way of thinking. It is completely different than the WEF. I viewed the WEF as not a flagpole in the middle, but in fact, they are the flag. Whichever way the wind blew, so it blew. You should have solar, you should have wind. Why are you going to do solar and wind? Why would Europe agree to be net zero in 2030 when they don't make a battery? They don't make a battery. So if they go 2030, they are deciding to be subservient to China, who makes the batteries.
See, the problem is I actually saw this entire discussion, and the European counterparts actually countered him very well. On the contrary, they gave some very intelligent responses. I saw the whole. This is like a 45 to 48-minute conversation. All of them spoke very well, and this is, what happens is, I think a lot of times the Americans, because they're belligerent. The Americans are always the loudest ones in the room. They I think they have convinced themselves that being belligerent kind of always makes you right. I'm not saying Lutnick is entirely wrong there. In fact, if anything, COVID proves that some essential things are there that need to be inside. Like, I remember at that time I was living the whole time in India at that time when COVID hit. It's after COVID that I moved half the year to Canada. And at that time I remember when the news broke that China basically supplies the PPEs of the whole world, and the masks of the whole world are pretty much coming from two countries. And I remember overnight, all those shut textile mills, those giant textile mills of India, they were overnight converted into PPE manufacturing centers by the government of India. Basically, the minister at that time, I distinctly remember, it was Smriti Irani. She was a textile minister at that time. And she basically oversaw the entire operations. And then the government basically, post that, decided that we're going to have a PPE manufacturing base in our country. So Lutnick is not entirely wrong, but where Lutnick goes wrong is that I think they have somehow convinced themselves that the tariffs are working. I have not seen any economic evidence of that. That's my problem. And the Trump administration, basically, if you ask, like, I have a few friends who actually are close to the administration, and you'd find it funny, but they're having a crisis of hiring. Can you believe it? Nobody wants to join the administration because of their absolutely lunatic policies when it comes to how ICE is handling many situations. And the problem is the sample pool, right, of people who want to work inside the administration is actually reducing. So they're left with a bunch of lunatics who actually are joining the administration, and the lunatics are doubling down on the lunacy. It's literally happening right now with this administration. They try to call someone outside. They're like, well, if I join your administration, you're going to go in 3 years. My career is much longer than 3 years. I'm done. So this is happening in real life. But let's tread into this bit. So what would you make of this entire thing, Darshan, with what's happening here, and what are the tangible responses Canada has, honestly?
See, if you view this from 30,000 feet, because EVs and batteries and critical minerals, that is at the ground level. But if you view this from 30,000 feet, someone made a very astute observation a couple of days ago on Twitter, saying that there are going to be 4 global powers in the near future. That is the US, China, India, and Islamists. Now, the first 3 are geographically bound. Islamists are not, although they do have their, nerve center somewhere, maybe in Qatar or somewhere. But they can be in every country. So once again, we are back to the Cold War days when it was democracies versus authoritarian regimes, CCP and the Islamists, because their tendencies are also authoritarian. So it would be more advisable for Canada to be on the side of the democracies, that is the US and India. But we have gone the other way, China and Qatar, which is kind of like the hub for Islamist power. So that is going to create friction. We are going to be caught in the middle. because the natural alignment dictates that we go in one direction, but our imperative to diversify away from US trade has made us go in the opposite direction. That is where I am seeing a lot of friction arising in the next 5-10 years.
Fair enough. I just, my problem with this entire thing is honestly beyond a point. As far as Canada is concerned, there are no good answers. I know Canada should not have, and I understand, cozied up to, let's say, the United States of, China in this particular case with the electric vehicles. But I honestly don't see how they would have solved this other problem. He's like, Doug Ford is mad. I have to play Doug Ford. He's so entertaining. I find the man so entertaining. He's so funny. Like, look at him. He's so angry, Doug Ford.
Too sure if President Trump wants Chinese spy vehicles coming across the border, but I'm betting the answer is no. When you get on your cell phone, it's the Chinese that are going to be listening to your, and I'm not making this stuff up, they're going to be listening to your telephone conversation. I find it ironic that the Prime Minister is using a burner phone and all his staff over in China, but we're making a deal, it's Huawei 2.0, to come back into Canada, and we get nothing but potential job losses in our factories.
So he's mad. It's obvious because it's Ontario that's going to be hit the most if the car industry gets in. But what is Doug Ford going to do if the Americans do the same thing? My problem is,
see, we don't, as Kirk rightly said, we don't have a car industry. I remember the days back in the mid-80s in India when Rajiv Gandhi became the Prime Minister, and then, the first thing was to establish TV transmission across the country, because by then it existed only in the 4 major metro cities: Mumbai, Delhi, Calcutta, and Madras, it was called then, now Chennai. The rest of the country did not have TV, and Rajiv Gandhi said, okay, let's now push the country into the 21st century. And then initially there were no TVs on sale in India. So everybody was going to Singapore, and then customs duty was waived, and that was a phase. Then a lot of Indian entrepreneurs started their own factories. They were not manufacturing, they were assembling. I was employed in one of them. Right? So what they would do is, it's maybe Kushalji is familiar with the term, completely knocked down kits. So each and every component comes separately in a box, right from the integrated circuits to the printed circuit board. There are several that went into all those old CRT, cathode ray tube TVs, and then transistors and resistors and diodes and thermistors and tuners, everything that, everything was in a separate box. And then you had to assemble them. So it would be a CKD consignment for 1,000 TVs. There was no manufacturing. They all claimed that we are manufacturing. They had their own brands, but none of it was actually manufactured. It was assembly. That is what we are doing in Canada. Right? We are assembly. So we don't have an auto industry, and it's a stroke of good fortune that we could run it for so many decades, but we don't have a strength of our own. See, initially when Trump came in his second term, he was even pressurizing the American auto companies to pull out of Canada. And that has fizzled out, but it can once again become a bone of contention. So unless you have your own economic strength, it doesn't have to be in the auto industry, but you have to have your own strength, and our strength is in resources, and then we can even actually value add to the resources. For example, we can use our abundant energy to establish data centers and go into AI and all. That is the direction. But unfortunately, and I can see Prime Minister Carney's predicament here because of the lost decade. I don't want to sound like Pierre Poilievre here, but the decade was lost, right? So you have run out of racetrack. if we had gone heavy on energy development, then we would be in the right place to go in for the data centers. But we can't, and we don't have the luxury of that time. So in the meantime, whatever deals you can make to keep your nose above the water, you make those deals.
Fair enough.
This is if I can just jump in here. This is exactly correct. We need to be doing stuff internally in Canada. The issue is we don't need to go to China to beg for EV plant. We can just build them. There's no secret to what China does with their EV plants. They use a ton of robotics, right? Most of the EV plants are completely automated. There is not a bunch of schmucks from a small town in Ontario working for a union there. Some of the plants don't even have lights on, like they operate completely in the dark because they don't need to. And the other thing is the government subsidizes the crap out of them, which is why they're cheap. So there is no secret magic that China does to build EVs. They just build them after copying crap. Every single car in the world that's good, they've copied and made it there in China. I mean, IP theft is as open there as as it gets. And they experiment, they innovated, the R&D, and they built it. To beat in China, and I've been there, you can produce anything out of a factory that you want. From a little kid's toy from a table, from a drone to whatever you want to experiment with. There'll be a factory, there'll be a place in there that will do it for you the next day. We don't have that in Canada. And we, even our LNG plants that we're building right now, they are also assembled in Canada. They're built in China, which is absolutely insane. So they ship them here, and we essentially put them together. We don't even build our own resource infrastructure anymore, which we used to, which is absolutely insane. So, how can you say we need to do business with the CCP or Qatar, which I think is even a bigger problem, when you don't even try to do business at home? And to value-added stuff that Darshan has said about the rare earths, this is exactly correct. And it's not just about data centers. Rare earths turn into instruments, they turn into things. We should be building them here, not send them over there, no, dig a hole in the ground and send them over there. We need to be able to produce those futuristic products. I've said the future factory will have a dog and a human in it, and the dog will be there to make sure that the human doesn't touch anything, and the human will be there to feed the dog. And this is exactly what we need to be doing. It's we need to innovate and create technology. And if I can just address your tariff point that you made before, the whole point of tariffs is to make someone else's product more expensive. This is what the US is missing in this whole tariff war. This is why, this arbitrary stuff from Trump, I'm pissed off today, you're going to get 25% tariff on something tomorrow, is just so silly and so stupid. What they need to be doing is building things at home, and they've been really lacking on that part. Because sooner or later you won't even need tariffs. What most people don't probably know about Canada especially is Canada formed because of tariffs. Before Canada came together as a country on the eastern part, before they remembered that we have the western part, the British colonies, they thought that we're going to be taken over by the US, and the US hit us with tariffs because there was a lot of coal production out in the east on the island. And when the US started targeting us with tariffs, they thought they're going to go after us, and that's how Canada is essentially formed, and that's what united us. And we're essentially in one way or another in a similar position. We just need to start building our own stuff and just stop making excuses for it, right? Like I said before, like with Mark Carney's speech, you can't say to the world, we have what you want, and deliver in 20 years. You can't say we have the smartest, most educated people in the world and lose them to the US, right? So we have to fix what we have at home.
Fair enough.
Consisted of increasing immigration. I mean, to Kirk's point that, factory will have one human and one dog. we went the other way. We flooded the country with people. I have written about this more than 6 years ago, that the way the technology was going even then, you could see that the same work would require far fewer people to do it. So why are you doubling down on immigration? And it is not just the the technology part that we have missed. The whole entrepreneurial part, where, as Kirk said, you want to make a different kind of a drone for a different kind of a purpose, then in China there will be people trying to do that. You can't find them here because they know that it's not going to pay in the end. So this is a very fundamental problem, as I see it, structural.
Mhm.
And when it comes to our politicians, one of them is right now in India. This is what he's doing. Where is he? Wait, let me find the image again. Nothing gets to me more than politicians
David
doing.
EB.
Oh my God! Did you see David's photos? It was
Yes.
so irritating.
Yeah.
So it's like, what is he doing here, man? Seriously, like, what is this? This is David EB in Punjab. Like, okay, we talked about historic, deep-rooted people-to-people and cultural connections BC and Punjab share. Or listen, is he on a Surrey Abbotsford tour, or is he on a BC tour? And imagine, this is coming from a person, I am ethnically Punjabi. I literally am a Punjabi. All right, Punjab, when you look at the states in India, is number 19 in terms of economic might, and it goes down and down and down. Where the good work in India is, where British Columbia should be traveling, it's where I live, Maharashtra, or my neighboring state, Gujarat, or some southern Indian states, or Haryana. Haryana is actually one of the most growing states of India. Haryana has a great economy. There are many states in India. Yeah, Canadians should be traveling, and I'm glad Canadian premiers are coming. I think even Alberta is scheduled to visit India, from Kirk was telling me. And I know Saskatchewan has, BC has, I know the federal ministers have, and basically everything is being lined up for the long-term visit of Prime Minister Carney to India. But to see a Canadian premier going and doing these, it's like, what is David EB the last Justin Trudeau we have in Canada?
Oh, one can only hope.
Yeah, because even Justin Trudeau never went to any of these places that you mentioned. Someone pointed out back in 2017, when Justin Trudeau went to India, that he never visited a place that did not exist 100 years before. So all those old places, Gandhi's ashram and the Golden Temple and Taj Mahal and all those. So it's kind of a sightseeing. As a sightseeing tour, it's a good itinerary.
It was a family vacation. He took his whole family.
Yeah.
And you know what the funny thing is? Like, the Punjab chief minister, premier, we call them chief minister in India, at that time was Amrinder Singh. Now he's from an army background. He's a former army guy.
Captain.
He refused to meet Trudeau. it was, and the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, had to intervene on behalf of Justin Trudeau, call Amrinder Singh and tell him, yo, meet him. He's a Canadian PM. Go meet him. Greet him. And that's when Amrinder Singh agreed. Because the Khalistanis, I clearly remember, and Amrinder Singh now, he's no longer the chief minister. He's left politics. Like, he's no longer in power, right? He's kind of an on and off politician, I would say. But Amrinder Singh very openly said, yes, Justin insulted one of my friends in Canada who's an MP. I forgot the name of the MP. And that MP was a non-Khalistani MP. Basically, Amrinder Singh is not a Khalistani, right? He's like a proud Indian Sikh. So he's like, screw Justin Trudeau, I'm not meeting you. And it was poetic. An Indian Sikh chief minister refusing to meet the Prime Minister of Canada because the Prime Minister of Canada was appeasing Khalistanis. This is where we are at. But
And do you remember who Justin Trudeau invited on his trip with?
Yeah, Jaspal Atwal.
Oh, that is another story. That is another hilarious story. But yeah, this is, see, my problem with this entire process is exactly this, that Darshan hit the nail on the head, where he said that when you have opportunity, you don't take the opportunity, and then you do all these things. Like right now, if I'm not saying that Canada and India are not, like, if you talk to sources behind, they will say no, the Canadians, at least on the India front, they are doing something, but it's so predictable. Every time somebody like David Eby visits India, right? It's not like David Eby did not go to Mumbai. He did. He met the Chief Minister of Maharashtra, Devendra Fadnavis, too. He did. I know he did. He may had some meetings, important meetings in Delhi too. But my problem is, then he went to Punjab to do this performative rubbish. He should not have done that. I would have rather seen David go to, let's say, Andhra Pradesh, meet Chandrababu Naidu, and talk about some new developments in Amravati, the upcoming capital. And that's where Canadian companies have great investment opportunity, where Canadians can make money, man. That's my whole thing is India and Canada trade. That's all I care about. I don't care if a Canadian premier ends up going to Punjab. Like every freaking time they go to Punjab, there's no business in Punjab. Can somebody give me the blowdown of, in actual numbers, what trade Punjab and Canada do? Like what? Nothing. It's the trade is with other
What do
parts
you
of
mean
India.
nothing? We do a lot of trade. We sell immigration scams to Punjab. It's $30,000-$40,000 a pop.
No,
Yes.
it's terrible.
The funny
80%
thing
of
is,
our 80% of our service exports to India consists of importing people.
the funny thing is that the illegal immigration scam is probably worth more than our trade with Qatar.
True.
So true. That is so true. Now, the one thing that I actually did want to discuss before we leave is okay, immigration has stopped, pretty much halted. The Canadian population has, after a long time, I think, not had a net increase. Now, all of that is good, but it was going to have certain knock-on effects. No decision does not have a knock-on effect. Now we're already seeing colleges being absolutely destroyed in and around GTA, because that entire economy was basically propped up. That entire growth spurt in the last 5 years in and around GTA, all the way up to Waterloo, Kitchener, Waterloo, that the entire, maybe up to London, Ontario, or maybe even Windsor, if you want to take Windsor, University of Windsor too, because that entire belt, we start from Windsor, we go right up to Ottawa, and anything in between that, on all four, all the directions, was all basically immigration driven. Now that immigration is gone, so you'll hear stories of X college shutting, Y college shutting, and now it's coming to a point where you know transport services like Brampton Transit, Mississauga Transit, and many other things, they're really facing the heat. Now, again, this is not a plea for going back to the same policy, but these are real effects that Canadians are going to feel. So, yeah, the rents have gone down, good, but property taxes are going to come up, and your public transport is going to become expensive. And eventually, if labor prices do go up, because a giant chunk of the labor force is going to suddenly disappear, so labor payments are going to go up, and businesses are just going to transfer it on to the customer. So how does one balance this out, is my question to both of you.
Well, first of all, these guys, I'm flummoxed as to how they were planning, or whether they were planning at all, because for them not to consider the possibility that this gravy train might come to an end is something that I haven't understood. How someone in charge of planning can take that approach, that this is going to keep going forever. Exponential expansion of population is going to keep going. So that is one thing that I have not understood. Secondly, everybody got hooked onto the easy money of duping people or selling bogus certificates and all. And according to the immigration minister of that time, Mark Miller, he said that we avoided 2 recessions because of that. So the whole model, business model, if you want to call it that, was sitting on a shaky foundation. So whatever pain comes, I mean, I'm very sensitive to people losing their jobs, especially when it's not their fault. So all the people in the post-secondary education sector who are getting laid off or who will get laid off in the next 1 or 2 years, my heartfelt sympathy for them. But this was a completely unsustainable model, and it's because we were not focusing on actual economic activity, like extracting our resources and using them for value add, for energy, for the power plants, for the data centers and critical minerals, for the AI infrastructure and all. Just yesterday I saw that India has put up 38,000 GPUs for AI, and then they are making it available at subsidized cost for startups and maybe even free for students and things like that. These are the things that create strength in an economy. We have these things are nowhere on our radar. Who is talking about putting so many GPUs for AI? Nobody. So unless we get our priorities straight, I don't see a very bright future here, unfortunately.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
it's it's we're dealing with the consequences of a false stimulus. That's all that it was. It was a desperate stimulus because they didn't know what else to do, or I don't know what common sense place, if there was one, where the strategy even came from or what they even thought would happen. The problem is things went up in prices because of it as well. So, when pendulum swings to one side, it will swing to the other side. So the pain will be just as big to the other side. And we see it in real estate across GTA, where places are down 20, 30% since their peak prices because there's nobody buying anymore, right? We created a Ponzi scheme economy over there where we can just shove people into whatever shitbox we can build, and then someone else will buy because they have nowhere else to live. So we build inefficient false economy, and the problem is we did poor city planning because of it. And I think that'll be one of the most interesting things to watch for is what happens when places do get ghosted out and nobody wants to live in a 400 square foot apartment or 300 square foot apartment. So I think that socioeconomic aspect of that side is very interesting more than anything. From the business side, there's a lot of businesses that essentially came and opened just to satisfy this demand. And yeah, they survived off cheap labor and hiring foreign labor instead of local labor. But the issues of no labor, they'll have to solve with innovation. And many businesses will just not be able to survive. You just sink or swim. This is one of the fundamental issues in Canada is that first of all, we do not have R&D investment, and we do not have investment increases in our industrial side. We haven't had an increase in our business side in 20 years. So we need that to change, and nothing will, and our economy cannot change unless we change that specific part.
Yeah, just to give you guys perspective, this was written in money.ca, and I'm reading direct quote. When international students disappeared, Canada's rental housing and campus economies felt it. International student arrivals in 2025 were nearly 60% lower than in 24, while overall international student enrollment fell by about 21%. At Kwantlen Polytechnic University in British Columbia, international student enrollment plunged nearly 60% year over year. The university announced in September that it would have to cut up to 45 full-time positions, leave 20 unfilled vacancies open. slash 3.3 million in discretionary spending and not renew some temporary contracts. Ontario Sentinel College suspended 49 programs in 2025. All these were useless programs, by the way, after significant revenue losses tied to declining international student numbers. Saskatchewan Polytechnic confirmed layoffs of staff due in part to lower international student enrollment and revenue shortfalls, underscoring how the impact extends within Canada. Conestoga College in Ontario provides one of the clearest examples of how federal policy changes have reshaped post-secondary institutions and their surrounding communities. Once among the country's largest recruiters of international students, the college reported just over 8,500 international students in spring 2025, down from more than 22,600 a year earlier, a decline of roughly 60%, driven largely by fewer new study permits. The drop placed significant pressure on revenue, as international tuition had become a major source of operating funds, while Conestoga reported a $121 million surplus for the 24-25 fiscal year. It projected a budget deficit for 25-26 as enrollment declined. The college responded with cost-cutting measures and workforce adjustments. In spring 2025, nearly 180 support staff received layoff notices and hiring was scaled back. By December 2025, after issuing notice to 181 full-time faculty, Conestoga announced an additional 197 layoff notices to support staff during a virtual town hall, marking the largest round of workforce reductions in its recent history. Local businesses that relied heavily on student foot traffic, including cafes, restaurants, retail shops, and transit-adjacent services, have also adjusted to lower patronage. While comprehensive data directly linking business performance to enrollment changes is limited, reporting and union commentary point to an economic recalibration in traditionally student-oriented districts. It's carnage. It is going to be horrifying. I feel bad. Like, you got to feel bad for these people. They are not at fault.
But I feel bad for some of those people for sure. They knew what they were doing though. And I feel more relieved and happy for the students because they are not taken advantage of. No, they're coming with the hope to develop fundamental skills in Canada, maybe get a job in Canada, stay in Canada. Listen, nobody comes to a random school, next to a strip club to get a high education. It's all just essentially just bogus, schools that popped up to give out bogus diplomas to students. So it was just essentially a scam economy, and I'm happy that we're not going to take advantage of a lot of students that sometimes the whole family put money together so they can try to get a better life somewhere else. Like it's totally how many lives have been destroyed of students that went home, families that went home with a garbage diploma that they could have got from Coursera for free, and went back home and paid 40 grand for it.
Yeah, you see, Conestoga is actually putting up its Stratford location for lease. That's the news I saw today. So they are currently operating only 2 days a week. Point number 2, sometimes it is wrong to refer to these boys and girls as students because they did not come here to study. They come here to do a job under the cover of a study permit and then hoping that they would eventually get permanent residency. So as Kirk said, it was a gigantic scam. And while we feel sorry for the people who are going to lose their jobs, it's good for the country that the scam has come to an end. You can't function long term on a succession of Ponzi schemes and scams. That's not how an economy is built. You have to build an economy where entrepreneurship is encouraged, rewarded. There is venture capital market. There is all sorts of funding arrangements. All sorts of new ideas are being tested. Out of 100, even 3 work out. That's a good ratio. But that is how you build an economy that is resilient and strong. We took the opposite approach and we'll pay the price for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just one last news segment. I don't know if you guys saw this. The Vancouver Sun reports the BC Conservative leadership race dominated by ex-BC Liberals. And for those who are not having fun in life, please go follow the leadership race for the federal conservatives, which has been moved from Ottawa to Calgary for very specific reasons, because allegedly it can be managed better in Calgary. Managed.
As Pierre gonna be moving out of Alberta to run somewhere else for the next election.
Yeah. What is this story? The man loses his own seat, then he goes to Alberta to fight, and he wins there. Now, why is he vacating that seat? Can somebody explain this magic to me?
I have not seen any even speculation, let alone an explanation of what the reasoning behind this is. Possible that the MP who resigned his seat so that Pierre could run in a by-election wants to come back locally. The support base is also saying that, and maybe Pierre can't run there anymore, but they can't afford to lose a seat. So the guy is coming back and Pierre has to look somewhere else for a riding to run in, maybe.
Yeah, they had an agreement. So when Pierre lost, the riding of Battlefield, I think that's what it's called here, is the most conservative riding in Canada. You can, you can run in like a shoe there that says "C" on it, and people will vote for it, right? Which also shows you how desperate he was for a seat, right? He just could not lose, go anywhere else. It's the safest ride into. And part of the agreement was that the current MP that just got elected would step down, get a cushy job that was provided to him, and he will come back for the next election, and Pierre would find somewhere else. He needs to be somewhere out east. Unfortunately, that's the nature of the politics and the votes in Canada, because Alberta's votes don't really matter. Will go towards conservative no matter what, mostly. So it's so he has to go somewhere where it's a little more east representative if they want to win or try to win an election, which is, it's a different story.
Yeah,
It's hilarious, but nobody can question the leadership of Pierre Poilievre these days, because I have to say he's got some great social media management skills. That
even yesterday he was tweeting about carbon tax. X the tax.
We're back at it.
Yeah, no, there are other issues to talk about, more important issues.
I think he's just happy being the opposition.
Well, it's a good paying job, right? There is no real expectations of you, If you leave the toilet seat down, that's all you essentially have to do at the end of the day. But it's I agree with Darshan. It's the communication, the strategy that's been executed in the party is absolutely piss poor. The policies that have been coming out of there are almost, I talk with a lot of business leaders, investors. Essentially, that's my world that I work in, and conservatives are irrelevant. Like, nobody is mentioning anything about them. There is not even, okay, when they will get in, this will happen. There is none of that. There is no even estimation or assumption that there is a chance. So this is the problem the conservatives have, right? And the big problem here, and I think that's what Darshan was also alluding to. So Mark Carney gave a fantastic speech on a world stage. He appears as a statesman. Pierre Poilievre is not a statesman. Right, he, talking about and raging on carbon tax and having little photo ops at, a lobster factory or whatever it is. That doesn't put us on, on a world stage. It doesn't give him the statesmanship status that he really needs. Let's remember, we have even conservative premiers, Scott Moe, Danielle Smith, that are praising Carney now, and Pierre doesn't have a relationship with any premier right now in Canada. Right, even Doug Ford worked against him. Right, it's like he's just not a presence within Canada in the places he should be. And that's what they should be really desperate to work on. And if I can just point out, the conservative, the CPC, had a foreign affairs, a shadow of foreign affairs minister, right? Who is it? Has anyone heard of from him about the whole saga?
No, I only see Michelle, ranting about immigration, which should have been their issue 3 years ago. But
We're
Yeah.
going to win.
good morning.
Yeah.
No, you forgot good morning. Good morning.
morning,
We are
Chris.
going to win. Yeah.
Good
But yeah,
morning.
so where are their ministers? Michelle, I think, does a good job. She's vocal at least. But where is the rest of their ministers?
True.
Like, where's the minister they're responsible for their portfolios, right? Like, even when the budget came out, where is the shadow finance minister? Nobody even heard about him. So the issue is Pierre can't win the election. He needs the full presence of CPC to win. And it's like, there is nobody around. Like, it's like, knock, knock, anyone home? Like,
No, they're not. And what is very interesting is I think it's not dawned on them that if they want to govern Ottawa, they need to win GTA.
Yes.
And for winning GTA, they need to get their Indian community strategy right. And I don't think they are. And they're gonna get a root shock, because at least in the last federal elections, the Indian community, a significant chunk of it, did go and vote for the federal Conservatives. And when you see MPs like this, it's not me. I'm just this person. She's the MP from Middlesex, Leanne Root.
Yeah.
And you're gonna say these things when, look, it's it's a very open discussion in our community circles now that the Conservatives have gone with the Khalistanis. It's like we've openly talked about it in our community circles. We in fact, if you go and talk to any Indian, they'll be like, yeah, the Conservatives are a Khalistani party now. It's so open. Everybody knows in our community. Everybody. And in fact, right now, the current leadership race also has a lot of Khalistani leaders managing things, allegedly. So yeah, keep an eye on this, is all I'm saying. Is if you're a Canadian, keep an eye on how the Canadians are not. It's unfreaking believable that this tiny group of people who has disproportionate amount of money through all sorts of sources, nefarious elements, and they have this disproportionate influence on Canadian politics. Now the Liberals got rid of them. Credit to Carney for that, at least. I wish he gets over his go green obsession. But they got rid of the Khalistani influence in the Liberal Party. So all the Khalistanis have now kind of parked their car in the Conservative parking lot. And the Conservatives are more than happy, because from what I hear, allegedly, the money keeps flowing in and the Conservatives are very happy.
Yeah.
Hey, we are where we are. Anyways, we'll wrap up. I do not understand this question. What they're saying is, can India and Canada pursue a trade relationship independent of US or China? As long as India gets uranium and oil, we shouldn't care about Canada-China ties. I honestly feel that's exactly what's going to happen. From what I hear, the Canadian Prime Minister is scheduled to visit India either in the last week of Feb or sometime in around mid-March. And the target that both India and Canada have set as of now is to double the trade. So I think they were somewhere between both import and export from both countries around, I think, $30 or $40 billion. I forgot the exact number. I don't know. It's just completely blanked out on me. They're targeting around 70 to 80 billion. And eventually in the long run, they want to cross the $100 billion mark of trade between both the countries. And the irony is that this is the easiest trade deal to sign, actually. India needs things that Canada naturally has. and Canada also needs some things that India has, and let's see. Let's hope for the best. But gentlemen, thank you very much as always. It was a pleasure talking to both of you. I wish you guys all the best. So guys, go follow both Kirk and Darshan on X, and I think I have Kirk's and Darshan's X handle written in the description. Yeah, it is there. So go follow them over there. Kirk also has a Substack if you want to subscribe to his Substack. Darshan also writes regularly on his website. As far as I'm concerned, you know the deal. If you want to support the podcast, you can join the membership program or send your donations through Interac Canada. The email ID is kushalmehra81@gmail.com. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.